Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Willow Grove Manor was quiet. Not a bad quiet, just empty. Arthur Finch, an old man with a walking stick and a heart full of memories, sat by the window. He watched the big old willow tree outside. Its branches moved slowly in the wind, like they were whispering secrets. Arthur's room was small and clean. A bed, a chair, a small table. On the table sat a worn photo album. He opened it carefully. The first picture showed a woman with bright eyes and a wide smile. Eleanor, his wife, gone now but never forgotten. She loved gardening. Their old farmhouse had been surrounded by her colorful flowers. He turned the page. Two children, a girl and a boy, smiled at the camera. Clara, his daughter, always with a pencil in her hand, drawing something amazing. Samuel, his son, holding a small guitar, his face full of dreams. Arthur sighed. He remembered the sounds of their old farmhouse. Eleanor singing while she cooked. The continuous sound of his hammer as he built furniture. A table for their kitchen. Chairs for the living room. A horse for Samuel. He remembered taking the kids to pick apples, the sun, and the fun they had. He remembered Eleanor teaching the kids about flowers and the bees. He had been a carpenter, his hands strong and skilled. He'd made things that lasted, things that held families together. Now, his hands shook slightly, and the only thing he held was his walking stick. It helped him move slowly, carefully, from his bed to the chair, from the chair to the window. The quiet in the room pressed down on him. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a summer evening. It was the quiet of being alone, of being left behind. He felt something in his chest, a slow pain that never quite went away. He missed the noise, the laughter, the happiness of a life fully lived. He even missed the arguments, the loud noises, the untidy rooms. He looked at Eleanor's face in the photo. Her smile seemed to reach out to him, a reminder of a life filled with love, even if it was now just a memory. Life changed. Clara grew up and became a very good architect. She traveled a lot for her work, always busy, always somewhere else. Samuel loved music more than anything. He joined a band, and they traveled too, playing concerts in different cities. The farmhouse became quieter. The phone rang less often. Then, Eleanor got sick. It was a rare illness, something in her blood. She became weak, and her beautiful garden started to look sad, just like her. The bright colors faded, the flowers drooped. Arthur tried to take care of her and the garden, but it was hard. He wasn't a gardener. He was a carpenter. He knew how to build things, not how to make them grow. One day, Eleanor was very weak. She held Arthur's hand and whispered, "Keep the music alive, Arthur," for Samuel. Those were her last words. After Eleanor died, the farmhouse felt empty. It was too big, too quiet, too full of memories. Clara and Samuel came for the funeral, but they didn't stay long. They had their own lives, their own busy schedules. They called sometimes, but the calls were short. "How are you, Dad?" "Fine, fine." But fine wasn't really true. One day, Clara and Samuel came together. They looked worried. "Dad," Clara said, "we're worried about you. You're all alone here. It's not safe." "We found a nice place," Samuel added. "Willow Grove Manor. It's a care home. You'll have your own room and people to look after you." Arthur didn't want to go. He loved the farmhouse. Every corner of it held a memory. But he looked at his children's faces, and he knew they were trying to do what they thought was best. He felt like he had no choice. He couldn't look after himself properly anymore, and the trips to the store became dangerous. So he moved to Willow Grove Manor. He packed a small bag, took his photo album, and left the farmhouse behind. The sounds of Eleanor's humming, Samuel's guitar, Clara's laughter, they all stayed behind, memories in an empty house. At Willow Grove, he had his own room, his own window, his own willow tree to look at. But it wasn't the same. He didn't blame his children. He knew they were busy. He understood that life moved on, but he felt forgotten, like a book someone had finished reading and put on a shelf. He thought a lot about those years when the house was full of life. Had he done something wrong? Had he worked too hard, making tables and chairs, and not spent enough time building something else? Something that lasted longer than wood? He provided for his children. He gave them things, a good life. But maybe that wasn't all that mattered. He began to wonder, did he give enough time? Did he listen enough? Did he show them how much they mean to him? Life at Willow Grove Manor was organized. Every day was the same. Breakfast at 8, medicine at 9, lunch at 12. Sometimes there were activities, games, or music, but Arthur usually stayed in his room. He preferred the quiet, even if it was a lonely quiet. There were other people at Willow Grove, of course, old people like him. Some were friendly, always smiling and chatting. Others were quiet, like Arthur, lost in their own thoughts. He made friends with a lady named Mrs. O'Connell. She used to be a librarian, and she loved books, just like Arthur used to. They talked sometimes about books and life, and it made the days a little less sad. The nurses were kind, but they were busy. They had many people to look after. There was a young woman, Miss Ramirez, who tried to get Arthur to join the activities. She was always smiling, full of energy. "Come on, Mr. Finch," she'd say. "It's good to be active." But Arthur usually shook his head. His legs hurt, and his heart felt heavy. Every morning, Arthur sat by his window and looked at the willow tree. The sun shone through the leaves, making patterns on the floor. He felt something when he looked at the tree, like it was old and wise, like it knew things, like it remembered things too. He started to remember the farmhouse even more clearly. He could almost smell Eleanor's bread baking in the oven. He could hear Samuel practicing his guitar, the same song over and over, until he got it right. He saw Clara, sitting at the kitchen table, drawing pictures of horses and castles, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Sometimes the phone would ring. It was Clara or Samuel. They called to check on him, but the calls were always quick. "How are you, Dad?" "Fine, fine." They told him about their lives, their work, their travels, but it felt far away, like they were talking to him from another world. He felt like he wasn't necessary, something they had to do, not something they wanted to do. It was hard to ask about their day, their work, when they didn't seem interested in his. He listened politely, said, "That's nice," and then the call would end. The quiet would return, and Arthur would go back to his window, back to the willow tree, back to his memories. The memories were all he had left, it seemed. He held them close, like precious treasures, afraid that if he let them go, he would disappear completely. He was determined he would not let them go, or let them be forgotten. One day, Miss Ramirez, the activities director, came to Arthur's room with a gift. "I thought you might like this, Mr. Finch," she said, handing him a large book with blank pages and a box of pencils. "It's a sketchbook. You can draw pictures in it." Arthur looked at the sketchbook. He hadn't drawn since he was a boy. He used to draw pictures of boats and trees, but that was a long time ago, and now his hands shook. He wasn't sure he could draw anything anymore. "I don't know, Miss Ramirez," he said. "I'm not very good at drawing." "It doesn't matter if you're good," she said, smiling. "It's just for fun. Try it. You might surprise yourself." Arthur looked at the sketchbook again. He thought about Eleanor, about her garden, about the colors and shapes. He thought about the willow tree outside his window. He opened the book and picked up a pencil. At first it was hard. His hand trembled, and the lines were shaky, but he kept going. He started with the willow tree, its long, flowing branches, its leaves beautiful. He drew the trunk, thick and strong, with its wide bark. Slowly, the drawing started to look like something. It wasn't perfect, but it was the willow tree. He felt a small spark of something, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't exactly happiness, but it wasn't sadness either. It was connection. He started to draw other things. He drew the farmhouse, the way it looked when he and Eleanor first moved in. He drew Eleanor's garden, full of flowers, the colors bright and vibrant, even in black and white. He drew Clara as a little girl, drawing at the kitchen table. He drew Samuel with his guitar, his face full of concentration. The sketchbook became his friend. He filled it with memories, with the echoes of his past. It was a way to hold on to those memories, to make them real again, even if only on paper. He wanted a record, proof that they lived, that they were happy. He didn't draw every day, but most days. He drew when he felt sad, when he felt lonely, when he felt like he was disappearing. The drawing helped. It gave him something to do, something to focus on. It made the quiet a little less empty. He knew his children were busy. He knew they had their own lives, but he hoped maybe one day they would see his sketchbook. Maybe they would see the drawings, and they would remember. Maybe they would understand how much he loved them, how much he missed them, how much their life together meant to him. He stopped worrying if they would care. He became determined that they would somehow, someday, see these drawings and understand. He had to keep the memories alive, not just for himself, but for them. One day, Miss Ramirez, the activities director, came to Arthur's room with a gift. "I thought you might like this, Mr. Finch," she said, handing him a large book with blank pages and a box of charcoal pencils. "It's a sketchbook. You can draw in it." Arthur looked at the sketchbook. He hadn't drawn since he was a boy. He used to draw pictures of boats and trees, but that was a long time ago, and now his hands shook. He wasn't sure he could draw anything anymore. "I don't know, Miss Ramirez," he said. "I'm not very good." "It doesn't matter if you're good," she said, smiling. "It's just for fun. Try it. You might surprise yourself." Arthur looked at the sketchbook again. He thought about Eleanor, about her garden, about the colors and shapes. He thought about the willow tree outside his window. He opened the book and picked up a pencil. At first, it was hard. His hand trembled, and the lines were wobbly, but he kept going. He started with the willow tree, its long, flowing branches, its leaves like teardrops. He drew the trunk, thick and strong with its rough bark. Slowly, the drawing started to look like something. It wasn't perfect, but it was the willow tree. He felt a small spark of something, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't exactly happiness, but it wasn't sadness either. It was connection. He started to draw other things. He drew the farmhouse, the way it looked when he and Eleanor first moved in. He drew Eleanor's garden, full of flowers, the colors bright and vibrant, even in black and white. He drew Clara as a little girl, drawing at the kitchen table. He drew Samuel with his guitar, his face full of concentration. The sketchbook became his friend. He filled it with memories, with the echoes of his past. It was a way to hold on to those memories, to make them real again, even if only on paper. He wanted a record, proof that they lived, that they were happy. He didn't draw every day, but most days. He drew when he felt sad, when he felt lonely, When he felt like he was disappearing, the drawing helped. It gave him something to do, something to focus on. It made the quiet a little less empty. He knew his children were busy. He knew they had their own lives, but he hoped maybe one day they would see his sketchbook. Maybe they would see the drawings and they would remember. Maybe they would understand how much he loved them, how much he missed them, how much their life together meant to him. He stopped worrying if they would care. He became determined that they would somehow, someday, see these drawings and understand. He had to keep the memories alive, not just for himself, but for them. A change came to Willow Grove Manor. A teenage boy named Ethan started visiting. He was the grandson of another resident, a woman who lived down the hall from Arthur. Ethan was different from the other visitors. He was young, full of energy, and he carried a guitar case. Ethan was learning to play the guitar. He wasn't very good yet, but he was passionate. He practiced every day, his fingers touching on the strings, his face in concentration. He reminded Arthur of someone he hadn't thought about in that way for a long time, though the person was always there, in the background. Arthur started to notice Ethan. He saw him in the common room, practicing his chords. He heard the music, sometimes clear and strong, sometimes unsure. It woke something in Arthur, a memory, a feeling. The feeling grew stronger. He began going to the common room more often. One afternoon, Arthur found himself sitting near Ethan. The boy was struggling with a particular song. Arthur watched him, his own fingers moving, as if remembering the feel of wood, the shape of a tool. He remembered teaching a younger boy some basic chords, guiding small hands. After a while, Ethan stopped playing and sighed. He looked frustrated. Arthur, without planning to, started to talk about his son Samuel. He described Samuel's first guitar, a small, cheap instrument, but loved. He remembered the hours Samuel spent practicing, the songs he learned, the dreams he had. He described taking Samuel to the music store, getting him better instruments. Ethan listened intently, his eyes wide. He asked questions about Samuel, about his music, about his band. Arthur answered, feeling a warmth spread through him, a warmth that had been missing for a long time. The act of remembering, of sharing, felt good. Another day, Ethan brought his guitar to Arthur's room. He showed Arthur the instrument, explaining the different parts, the way the strings moved, the way the sound was created. Arthur showed Ethan some of his old carpentry tools, the chisels and hammers, explaining how he used them to shape wood, to create furniture. They discovered a shared love, not just for music, but for creating things, for taking something raw, wood or sound, and turning it into something beautiful, something meaningful. One afternoon, Ethan started to play a simple melody. Arthur, without thinking, started to tap his foot. Then, he started to sing along, softly at first, then louder. It was an old folk song, one that Eleanor used to sing. He found tears forming, but wiped them away. Ethan smiled. He played another song, and another. Arthur listened, tapping his foot, singing along, feeling a spark of joy, a spark of life in him. The music filled the room, chasing away the quiet, replacing it with something alive. It was a connection, a bridge, not just between him and Ethan, but between him and his past, between him and his son. He was sharply reminded of his son. He wondered about Samuel's current relationship with music, if the passion was still burning. He began to feel that it was up to him to reconnect with that. Ethan's visits and their shared music sparked something in Arthur. He felt a renewed energy, a want to connect, not just with the past, but with the present, with his son. He decided to do something he hadn't done in a long time. he decided to write a letter. Not just any letter. He wouldn't write about the weather, or his health, or the routine at Willow Grove. He would write about music. He would write about Ethan. He sat at his small table, the sketchbook open in front of him. But this time he didn't pick up a pencil. He picked up a pen. The pen felt unfamiliar in his hand, heavier than the pencil, less forgiving. But he started to write, slowly, carefully. He wrote to Samuel. He described Ethan, the young guitarist, the grandson of another resident. He told Samuel about the way Ethan's music filled the common room, about the way it made him feel. He told him how much it reminded him of Samuel himself. He didn't write about the past, not directly. He didn't mention Eleanor, or the farmhouse, or the old days. He focused on the present, on the music, on the shared connection he felt with Ethan. He wanted Samuel to see that music was still important to him, that it still had the power to move him, to connect him. He described one particular afternoon when Ethan played a song that Samuel used to love. He wrote about how he sang along, how he tapped his foot, how he felt a spark of joy, a burning of the old flame. Then he took a deep breath, and he wrote something he couldn't make himself to write before. He expressed his hope. He hoped that Samuel hadn't given up on music. He hoped that Samuel still played, that he still felt the passion, that he still remembered the songs they used to sing together. He didn't ask Samuel to visit, not directly, but he invited him. He invited him to come to Willow Grove, to bring his guitar, to play together. He suggested that they could share the music, just like he was sharing it with Ethan. He found one of his drawings, a sketch of Ethan playing his guitar. He included it with the letter. It was a visual reminder, a connection to the music, to the feeling he was trying to understand. He carefully put the letter in an envelope and addressed it to Samuel. He felt a mix of emotions, hope, fear, anxiety, and sadness. He wasn't sure how Samuel would react. He wasn't sure if the letter would reach him, not just physically, but emotionally. He gave the letter to Miss Ramirez, asking her to mail it for him. She smiled and promised she would. Arthur felt a sense of hope, a sense of having done something important, something that might, just might, bridge the distance between him and his son. He had planted a seed of hope, and now all he could do was wait. He felt he had crossed a bridge himself by the simple act of writing. Arthur waited. He looked at the willow tree every day. He hoped for a letter from Samuel, a phone call, something. The tree's leaves moved in the wind. Arthur felt like the tree was watching him, waiting with him. Days went by, then weeks. No letter, no call. Arthur started to feel sad again. He thought maybe Samuel was too busy. Maybe he didn't care about the letter. Maybe the music wasn't important anymore. He kept drawing in his sketchbook. He drew the willow tree, the garden, the other people at Willow Grove. Drawing made him feel a little better. It helped him remember. Mrs. O'Connell, the lady who liked books, talked to Arthur. She saw he was sad. She told him to be patient. She said good things take time. Arthur tried to believe her. Ethan came to visit again. He brought his guitar. He played new songs. He showed Arthur how to make different sounds. Arthur tapped his foot and smiled. The music made him feel happy, even if it was just for a little while. It was a simple moment, an old man and a younger boy, but Arthur felt lucky. Ethan didn't know about Samuel. Not really. Arthur didn't talk about his sadness, his worry. He just enjoyed the music, the company, the shared moment. Ethan asked simple questions and got simple answers. He seemed to appreciate spending time with Arthur. Arthur watched Ethan play. He saw the young boy's passion, his dedication. He remembered Samuel, at that age, with the same look in his eyes. The memory made his heart ache. but it also gave him a little bit of hope. He kept looking at the willow tree. He wondered if the tree knew something he didn't. He wondered if the tree could tell him what would happen. He knew it was silly, but it made him feel a little bit better. The willow tree, big and old, felt like a friend, a silent friend who understood. He waited, day after day, his hope a small burning flame, kept alive by the music, by the drawings, by the memory of a boy with a guitar, and the wisdom of an old willow tree. He found small moments of happiness while he waited. One afternoon, Miss Ramirez came to Arthur's room. She held a piece of paper and looked excited. It was a printed email. Arthur wasn't very good with computers, so Miss Ramirez often helped him with these things. This email was from Samuel. Miss Ramirez read the email aloud, slowly and clearly. Samuel was on tour with his band. He was very busy, but he had received Arthur's letter. The letter and the drawing of Ethan touched him deeply. Samuel wrote that he had been having trouble writing new songs. He felt stuck, uninspired, but Arthur's letter had reminded him of the joy of music, of the simple pleasure of playing. It had reminded him of his childhood, of the songs they used to share. He apologized for not visiting more often. He explained that life on tour was difficult, and he often felt lost and disconnected. But he promised to visit Willow Grove as soon as the tour ended. He said he would bring his guitar. He also mentioned her sister, Clara. Clara had seen the email too. She was also planning to visit. She realized that it was a very long time since she visited Arthur, and she wanted to make things right. Arthur felt a wave of emotions. He was happy, relieved, and a little surprised. He hadn't expected such a positive response, especially not from both of his children. He had hoped for a small connection, but he hadn't dared to hope for a reunion. Miss Ramirez smiled at Arthur. She saw the tears in his eyes, the trembling of his hands. She knew how much this meant to him. Arthur looked out the window at the willow tree. The sun was shining and the leaves seemed to glow. He felt a sense of peace, a sense of gratitude. The letter, the music, Ethan, the sketchbook, they had all played a part in this. They had all helped to bridge the distance, to reconnect him with his children. He knew it was just an email. It wasn't the same as a visit, as a hug, as hearing Samuel's voice in person. But it was a start. It was a promise. It was an act of love and connection that had been lost, and was now perhaps being found again. The waiting continued, but the feeling of it had entirely transformed. A month went by. Arthur still waited for Samuel and Clara to visit. He looked at the email again and again. He started to feel worried. Maybe they were too busy. Maybe they forgot. He continued his routine at Willow Grove. He drew in his sketchbook. He talked with Mrs. O'Connell. He played music with Ethan. These things helped him, but he still felt a little sad. He wanted to see his children. Ethan noticed Arthur was quieter than usual. He kept playing music, trying to cheer him up. He showed Arthur new songs he learned. He told Arthur about his plans for the future. He wanted to become a professional musician. Arthur listened to Ethan and felt proud. He saw Samuel's young face in Ethan's. He remembered Samuel's dreams. He wanted to help Ethan achieve his dreams. One day, Arthur decided to do something else. He would write to Clara. He wouldn't write a letter this time. He would draw a picture. He chose a big piece of paper from his sketchbook. He picked up his charcoal pencil. He started to draw. He drew the old farmhouse. He drew it carefully, remembering every detail. He drew the porch, the windows, the roof. He drew the big tree in the front yard. He drew Eleanor's garden, but he didn't draw it empty. He drew it full of flowers. He remembered the colors, even though he was drawing in black and white. He made the flowers look bright and happy. He made it how he imagined that Eleanor would want it to be. He worked on the drawing for many days. He took his time. He wanted it to be perfect. He wanted Clara to see it and remember. He wanted her to remember the good times, the happy times, the times when they were all together. When the drawing was finished, he looked at it for a long time. He felt proud. It was the best drawing he had ever made. It was a gift for Clara, a gift from his heart. He was determined to use his talent to make the connections. He carefully wrapped it for protection, for when she eventually visited. Ethan continued his regular visits, unaware of Arthur's internal struggles or his new project for Clara. Their musical afternoons filled the gap, providing a rhythm to Arthur's days, a reminder of connection and shared joy. One afternoon, Arthur was in the garden at Willow Grove. He was drawing, as usual. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. He heard a car. He didn't think much about it. Cars came and went all the time. Then he heard a voice, a familiar voice. He looked up. He saw two people walking towards him. It was Samuel and Clara. Arthur stood up, slowly, his walking stick shaking a little. His heart beat fast. Samuel was carrying a guitar case. Clara was carrying a large flat package. They reached Arthur. There were tears. There were hugs. It was a long time since Arthur had hugged his children. He felt their warmth, their love. It was real. They were really there. Clara gave Arthur the package. He opened it carefully. It was a framed picture, a picture of Eleanor's garden in full bloom, bright, colorful, beautiful, just like he remembered it. Samuel opened his guitar case. He took out his guitar. It was a beautiful instrument, much nicer than the one he had as a boy. He started to play. He played a new song, a song he had written himself, a song inspired by Arthur's letter. The music filled the garden. It mixed with the sounds of the birds, with the rustling of the willow leaves. It was a beautiful sound, a sound of love, of family, of reunion. Clara sat beside Arthur. She held his hand. She told him she was sorry. She had been so busy with her work. She had forgotten what was important. She promised to visit more often. She promised to make more time for him. Arthur showed them his sketchbook. He showed them the drawings of the farmhouse, of Eleanor's garden, of them as children. Samuel and Clara looked at the drawings carefully. They remembered. They smiled. They felt close to their father, closer than they had felt in years. Then Arthur called for Ethan to come and meet everyone. Ethan came carrying his own guitar. Arthur introduced Ethan to Samuel and Clara. He explained that Ethan was a young musician, a friend. Ethan and Samuel then started to play music together. After that day, things changed. Samuel and Clara started to visit Willow Grove regularly. Sometimes they brought their own families. Arthur became a grandfather again, a real grandfather, not just a picture in a frame. The garden at Willow Grove became a special place. It was a place for family, for friends, for music. Samuel and Clara helped Arthur plant new flowers. They made the garden beautiful again, just like Eleanor's garden used to be. Ethan continued to visit too. He became like a part of the family. He and Samuel often played music together. Arthur watched them, his heart full of happiness. He saw the connection between them, a connection built on music, on shared passion. Arthur continued to draw. He drew pictures of his grandchildren, of Samuel and Clara, of Ethan. He drew pictures of the garden, full of flowers, full of life. He drew pictures of the willow tree, its branches reaching out like arms, embracing them all. He felt at peace. He was surrounded by love, by family, by friends. The echoes of the past were still there, in his memories, in his drawings. But now, they were mixed with the sounds of the present, with laughter, with music, with life. He realized that love wasn't something that disappeared. It could change, it could grow, it could be rebuilt. Like the willow tree, it could bend in the wind, but it wouldn't break. It could survive the storms, the distance, the time. He no longer worried about being forgotten. He knew his children loved him. He knew his family was strong. He knew he had made a difference, not just by building things with his hands, but by building connections with his heart. The willow tree stood tall and strong, its leaves whispering in the breeze. Arthur sat beneath it, surrounded by his family, listening to the music, feeling the warmth of the sun, feeling the love that surrounded him. He was home. He wasn't just understood, he was seen. He was appreciated. He was part of it all. He felt a deep contentment, and he knew that his legacy was secure, not in things, but in people.
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.